I grew up in Roane County, Tennessee, in a place called Emery Gap, where the Emery River made its way through Walden Ridge. And back then, there were only 4 houses within a mile of my childhood home on Avery Branch. And as a boy, I spent many days walking that empty gravel road. Most days, only 2 or 3 pickup trucks would make their way in or out. But other than that, it was like we lived in our own little world. The closest house to ours was owned by a man in his 80s who I called Mr. Max. Most folks chose to leave Mr. Max alone since he was the type of fella that was long set in his ways and was fiercely independent. He had spent his entire life in Emery Gap and had never even owned an automobile. He still had farm animals and a large garden that he spent each and every day tending to. Yet, even as a boy, I was always drawn to old-timers. I was a sponge when it came to listening to their stories. And for this reason, Mr. Max would tolerate me dropping by a couple times a week whenever I saw him sitting on the porch, shelling beans, or out in his barn tending to his animals. Max lived alone, and truth be told, I think I was one of the only people in the world that he liked at all, even though he didn't come right out and say it. He always called me Jack, even though that wasn't my name. Each time I'd visit Max, he'd say, "Well, there's Jack, the smartest young'un to ever live on Avery Branch." This particular day, when I was about 10 years old, it was cold and cloudy as I turned off the gravel road and made my way down the narrow dirt path through the woods that led to Max's small cabin, which was hidden from the view on the main road. The morning air was still as I emerged from the woods and crossed the open patch of ground approaching. I could see smoke rising sluggishly from the mud-daubed chimney at one end of the old log cabin. The smoke seemed to rise only a foot or so above the chimney, and then it just hung there before slowly plunging towards the ground, spreading across the yard like a pale gray mist as it drifted slowly down Walden's Ridge. Even as a boy, I knew this was a sure sign of falling weather, and I also knew it'd be the first thing that Max would mention when I saw him. Yet, before I reached his cabin, I could hear the old man working in his barn where he kept his livestock. I walked around the cabin and headed for the barn, and as I did so, a brood of chickens that were walking freely about the place started raising their usual racket whenever a strange person or an animal appeared on the place. Their screeching seemed to increase as I approached the barn, and they were nervously hopping up and down and running back and forth. Inside the barn, I found Mr. Max leading his big Brindle Ox slowly in a circle by a rope tied around the animal's horns. This steer was what he called his work brute, since it was broken to the yoke, to do his plowing and cultivating, and to pull that homemade sled with those sourwood runners that Max used to haul things instead of a wagon. This was the second ox that I could remember Max owning during my childhood. They all seemed to be about the same size and always brindle in color, and each one in turn was called Old Buck. I once asked him why they were always the same color, and he claimed it was best to always get a brindle-colored animal to break to the yoke, and a brindle cow for the most milk, since their milk tasted the best. I stood there as Max led the ox around a time or two more, while he stood off at a rope's length, looking the animal over carefully, and pulling his head back and forth a time or two. And just then he spoke. "Well, I thought old Buck was getting a hollow tail yesterday. He didn't eat his grain, but he's pertined up pretty good during the night. I sure would hate to lose him. There used to be a passel of brindle oxes, but they're hard to come by these days." Then the old man walked up to the steer and unhooked the rope. "I'll just let him run loose and pick around a bit. That'll do him good." I followed Max as he walked back down the path to the cabin. The wind had begun to stir, and it seemed to be getting colder. It was a raw, damp, cold day, the kind of cold that seemed to go right through my body and chilled me to the bone. Hey guys, JD here. Click the link below to check out my new book. It's full of stories just like the one you're listening to right now. Now, back to the story. Once we got inside, Max took a seat next to the fire and called out, "Jack, grab a couple logs and put them on those coals." They quickly set ablaze when I put them in the fireplace, as Max stuck out his hands toward the flames and rubbed them together before standing up and turning his back to the fire. "That there's apple wood. Oh, it makes the hottest fire, and it's got more colors in the flames than any other firewood. Now, most old folks will swear by hickory or oak wood when it's cut at the right time during the moon. But not me. I tell you, give me apple wood every time." We sat in silence for a while, watching the flames lick the chimney with blue, yellow, and green lights playing through them, and listening to the wood crackling and popping and sending up showers of sparks. The hearth fire was really throwing out the heat now. I knew Max well, and I knew if I sat there quiet long enough or said just the right words to start him off, he would end up on some tale that I'd never heard before. I pushed my chair back a bit from the hot fire as he proceeded to crumple up some of his homegrown, home-cured tobacco in the palm of his hand to put it in that old stained pipe of his. Just then, he reached over like he always did, and he picked up a live, hot coal from the fireplace and held it to his pipe until he had a cloud of smoke going. Now, how he did that without blistering his fingers, I never could figure out, but I'd seen my Papa Coy do the same thing. Yet, when I tried it, I burned the heck out of my fingers. "Mr. Max, what's wrong with old Buck?" I asked. You see, long before the veterinarians ever made their way into these mountains, Mr. Max had once been famous in the area in the days gone by for his ability as a cow doctor. "Yep," he started out, "I thought old Buck was getting a hollow tail for a while, but that's easy to cure. All you gotta do when a cow or a steer gets hollow tail is just take the end of its tail where the brush is and cut open 3 or 4 inches of it with your pocket knife, and then just mix up some salt and pepper. Well, I guess some folks used to use black pepper. Oh, but not me, Jack. I'm a red pepper man. I tell you, it's stronger. Anyways, you pack that slit in that tail full of that red pepper and salt, and then wrap a rag around it so it's in to hold the salt and pepper. It'll cure hollow tail every time. That animal will perten up right quick. Mr. Max, I reckon if you did that to a man, I bet he'd perten up right quick too. Jumping around or hollering, it sounds pretty painful to me." Just then, Mr. Max whirled on me. "Now listen up, Jack. Don't you get none of that smart aleck talking to me. I've been doctoring cattle for nigh on 75 years. And back when I was young, I was the only cow doctor in these parts. And we didn't have these college fellas running around with their sheepskins back then. Why, in my day, cows got hidebound, and hollow horn, and hollow tail, and murrain. And sometimes they lost their cud. And once in a while they got milk fever. And I could doctor all of them, I tell you." Just like that, Max began to get mellow again, since I had started him out on one of his favorite topics. And although the fire didn't need him, he leaned over and put a couple more logs on. He laid his pipe aside, and he tore off a big chew with his teeth from his home-twisted tobacco. The chickens, which had been raising such a racket back around the barn, had now drifted down outside the cabin, looking through the screen door. And before I could ask him a question, he started talking again. "Now, back in my day, when I was cow doctoring, most folks sawed off their cows' horns so they wouldn't get hollow horn. Me, I always sawed them off after a new moon. That way, they didn't bleed so much. But I tell you, one time there was this fella from over there in Harriman. He sent word over that he had several heifers that he wanted the horns took off. And when I got to his place, I told him to wait till the new moon, or they would bleed to death. I tried to get him to wait, but he said no, and just go right on ahead because he didn't believe in that stuff." Just then, Max paused for a moment and shook his head sadly. I tell you, he just wouldn't listen to me, and that fella lost 3 of his 5 head. I just couldn't stop the bleeding, but I tell you, that learned him a good lesson that he'll never forget. Max reached over with his walking cane that he never used, but he always kept by his chair, and he punched at the fire, sending up a shower of sparks before settling back down in his chair and starting again. Now, when an animal's got the hollow horn, there ain't but one thing to do. A man would bore a hole right in the horn, right at the hairline, and pour a mixture of salt, pepper, and vinegar in it. And if the first dose didn't make the brute well, all you had to do is open up the holes a day or so later and fill them again. Now, some folks poured turpentine in the horns, but either way, it was fine, and it would cure up the hollow horn real quick like. Now, you take the murrain, he continued. When a brute took the murrain, the only way to stop it was to take a sharp butcher knife and punch a hole in the dewlap. What's dewlap, Mr. Max? Well, don't you know? Everybody knows that, Jack. That's the loose fold of skin that hangs around the bottom of a cow's neck, just in front of and between the front legs. Well, anyhow, like I said, you punch a hole through the dewlap, and then you run a long twist of home-cured tobacco through that hole and tie the ends together so it'll stay put. Now you leave it there for a few days until that twist drops off, and by then, they're all well. And I tell you something else, a hidebound animal was also common during my day. A cow or a steer would get run down so poor, with their hide stuck tight and their hair was standing all up on their back. The only thing a fella had to do was to get a good hold of that hide along the middle of the back and tear it loose. Then take a big kitchen spoonful of turpentine and hold it to the animal's navel until the navel drunk it all up. Now, sometimes, if it was a bad case of hidebound, the navel would take up several spoonfuls before it did any good. Upon hearing this, I spoke up. Mr. Max, that sounds painful. Don't you think it might be better to give the animal more grain or hay to help them build their strength? Now listen here, Jack. I know you got some education on you, and you're a right smart youngster, but don't you go a-telling me how to doctor sick cattle. I've been a-doing it too long. Before he could start again on his cattle doctrine, I asked him, Mr. Max, back in your time, did you ever hear old folks say that no matter how hard the winter is, there will always be 2 weeks plowing weather in February? Just like that, Max brightened right back up. Well, I sure have. I've heard it a many times, and back when I was growing up, some folks swore by it, and they would put off their plowing until February. Oh, but not me. I never put much stock in that saying myself. I always thought it was just a lazy man's excuse to go hunting and fishing during the fall of the year. Now, my pa and grandpa before me, they practiced plowing in the fall as soon as the crops were gathered. Plow early, they always preached. That way, the dirt crumbles and the clods breaks up from freezing during the winter. And the ground just stores up all that moisture for the spring planting. Yes, sir, crops just naturally do better on land that was plowed in the fall than land that was plowed in February. Max fell silent and seemed to doze off, like many of the old ones often do on a cold day when sitting in front of a blazing open fire. I noticed that the wind had sprung up and was beginning to whistle around the corners of the cabin, and the clouds seemed to be lower on the mountaintop than they were when I first reached the cabin. I gazed around the inside and marveled at the many dried foods that Max had hanging on the sides and from the rafters. Some of the stuff I know had to been hanging there for several years, and some of the flour sacks that he had stuff in had one time been clean and white, but now were very dingy with accumulated dust and smoke. Just then, I could hear the sleet hitting the old tin roof of the cabin. Oh, Mama would skin me good if I didn't get back home. So I put on my coat and I pulled down my hoodie over my ears, and I paused to take one more look back at Max. The wise old man, the master storyteller, was now sound asleep. But even as a young boy, I cherished his stories, and each time I left Mr. Max's cabin, I left with a wisdom that could never be taught in school. And now, here it is 50 years later, and I'm sharing Mr. Max's story with you. Till next time, my friends.